He swore never to love again, until a schoolteacher with a broken wagon changed his life. The words might have sounded like a tale told by some frontier poet, but on the edge of Red Creek, they were about to come true. Late afternoon light bled across the plains, gold fading into storm gray. The wind carried the dry smell of rain, rattling the cottonwoods and whispering through the tall grass. Dust rose behind a wagon that listed to one side, its wheel cracked and useless. A woman stood beside it, skirts muddy, hat pulled low, a stubborn strand of chestnut hair clinging to her cheek. Her name was Nora Hale, and she'd been on the road for 3 days, bound for Red Creek to take up the schoolteacher's post. Her horse snorted, uneasy. The sky was bruising darker by the minute. She pressed her hand to the worn leather reins and whispered, "Just a little longer, Scout. We'll find shelter soon." The horse tugged against her hold, ears flicking. A distant rumble rolled across the valley. The storm was moving fast. From the ridge beyond, a lone rider watched her. Harlan Boyd, a man built from hard seasons and harder losses. His hat brim shadowed a face the sun had carved deep lines into. He didn't slow when he first saw her, only turned his horse slightly, as if he meant to ride past. But the sight of that broken wheel stopped him. He'd seen too many people stranded before, and too many he couldn't save. With a quiet sigh, he turned his horse downhill. The sound of hooves made Nora straighten. She brushed dust from her skirts and reached, almost without thinking, for the small revolver hidden in her satchel. But when the rider came into view, she saw a man. Broad-shouldered coat dark with trail dust, the look of someone who belonged to the land. "Trouble?" His voice was rough, not unkind. She nodded toward the wagon. "The wheel gave out a mile back. I thought I could make it, but..." She glanced at the sky. "Seems I was wrong." He dismounted in one easy motion, the leather creaking under his weight. He didn't smile, just walked over to the broken wheel and crouched, running a calloused hand along the splintered rim. "Cracked clean through," he said. "You won't roll that another yard." Nora tried to sound steady. "I'll fix it in the morning. I've tools." He looked up at her, then at the thunderheads climbing the horizon. "Won't be much of a morning left once this hits." She followed his gaze. The first drops were already falling, fat, heavy, and cold. He rose, motion brisk. "My place is a mile west. You can wait out the storm there." She hesitated. "I don't even know your name." "Harlan Boyd," he said simply. "Used to run cattle through this valley. Don't much anymore." She studied him, his distance, the guarded calm in his eyes, and finally nodded. "Nora Hale." He gave a short nod in return, then took her wagon horse's reins and tied them behind his own. The wind kicked dust into their faces. "Best move," he said. They rode through the downpour, the land turning to shadow and silver as lightning laced the hills. When they reached his ranch, a weathered cabin standing lonely against the storm, Harlan swung down and held the door for her. The inside smelled of wood smoke and rain. A single lamp burned low, throwing a warm circle of light across the room. "Set your things there," he said. Nora nodded, dripping and shivering, her fingers tracing the worn table edge. "Thank you, Mr. Boyd." He gave no answer, only hung his hat, moved to the hearth, and added a log to the fire. Sparks rose, bright and brief. Outside, the storm broke fully, thunder cracking like old grief. And in that flickering firelight, two strangers stood at the edge of something neither of them yet understood. The rain didn't let up through the night. It drummed on the roof and hissed in the chimney, as if the sky itself was trying to wash the earth clean. Nora sat near the fire, her wet dress steaming faintly as she warmed her hands. Harlan moved about the room in silence, setting a tin plate on the table, cutting bread, and ladling out a pot of stew that smelled of beef and sage. He didn't talk much. She guessed he wasn't used to company. "Eat," he said simply, pushing a bowl toward her. She murmured thanks and took a careful bite. The stew was hot and rough, but filling. After a while, she asked quietly, "Do you live here alone?" He didn't look up from his plate. "Since last spring." Something in his voice made her pause. Not bitterness, more like a hollow note that hadn't healed. She didn't ask more. The fire cracked. Shadows moved across the walls, long and soft. Harlan stood and walked to the window, peering out through the rain. "You said you were headed to Red Creek?" "Yes. They wrote me from the school board. I'm to start next week." He nodded once. "That wagon won't make it till morning. You can take the spare room tonight." Nora hesitated. "I wouldn't want to trouble you." "You already are," he said flatly, but there was no sharpness in it, only weariness. "But I ain't about to send you back out there." A faint, almost reluctant smile touched her mouth. "Then I'll say thank you again." He didn't answer. He crossed to the fire, stoked it, and sat back down, elbows on his knees. The lamplight caught the small silver ring hanging from a chain around his neck. Nora's eyes flicked to it, then away. "Your wife?" she asked softly. His jaw tightened. "Was. Stagecoach ambush 2 winters ago." The room went still. Only the rain filled the silence. "I'm sorry," Nora said. He gave a short nod, still staring at the fire. "So am I." After that, they didn't speak for a long time. When the wind howled against the shutters, Nora reached into her satchel to check something, her small pistol. She pulled it out, wiped the damp from the barrel, then hid it again under her shawl. Harlan's eyes caught the motion. "You carry iron?" She froze. "Only for the road." "Schoolteacher with a gun," he muttered half to himself. "Ain't seen that before." Her voice was steady, but there was something hard beneath it. The road doesn't care what a woman teaches, only whether she survives it. For a heartbeat, they just looked at each other, their silence sharper than words. Then Harlan nodded once, slowly. "Fair enough." The storm eased a little after midnight. Harlan showed her to the spare room, where the quilt smelled faintly of cedar. "If the roof leaks, there's a bucket under the bed," he said. She smiled faintly. "You're not much for company, are you?" "Didn't plan on having any," he said, turning away. "Neither did I," she whispered as the door closed behind him. When the house finally settled into quiet, Nora sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the revolver lying beside her satchel. Her hands trembled just slightly. She wasn't sure if it was the storm or the memory of the man she'd left behind in Kansas City. She blew out the lamp, but the thunder rolled again, far off now. Out in the main room, Harlan sat awake by the fire, staring into the flames. The light flickered across his face, tracing old pain like a map. He told himself the woman would be gone by morning, but something in the way she'd said his name, steady, unafraid, lingered longer than the storm. Morning came quietly and gray. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that shimmered like bits of sky in the mud. Smoke rose from Harlan's chimney, straight and clean. Nora stepped out of the spare room, her hair loosely tied, her dress still wrinkled from the night before. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Harlan stood at the stove, pouring black coffee into 2 tin mugs. He didn't turn as he said, "Your wagon's still stuck where it broke. Ground's too soft to lift it till noon." Nora walked closer. "Then I'll make myself useful till then." He glanced at her, half suspicion, half respect. "Don't recall asking for help." "You didn't," she said simply, taking a rag to dry the dishes from the night before. For a moment, something almost like amusement flickered across his face. "You're a stubborn one, Miss Hale. Teaching school requires it," she replied. They worked in silence after that. The small clatter of dishes, the low creak of floorboards, and the soft whistle of wind through the cracks gave the cabin a strange, homely rhythm. By the time they finished, the sun had broken through. Harlan stepped outside to check the horses. Nora followed, her boots squelching in the damp earth. "Storm tore through the ridge," he said. "Fence is half down." She shaded her eyes against the light. "You'll need help fixing it." "I'll manage," but she was already picking up one of the tools leaning by the post. "You can manage faster if I hand you the wire." Harlan gave her a long look, the kind a man gives when he's not sure whether to argue or admire. "Suit yourself." By midday, the fence was mended and the wagon wheel stood propped against a stump. Harlan knelt beside it, tightening the bolts she'd found in his shed. Nora crouched nearby, holding the frame steady. "You've done this before," she said. He gave a short laugh, rare and dry. "Once or twice. Out here, if something breaks, you learn quick or you lose it." The quiet between them was easier now, but then, hoofbeats. Both turned. Down the road from Red Creek came a rider, dust trailing behind. He slowed near the cabin, tipping his hat. It was Sheriff Ed Corman, a tall man with gray whiskers and a steady gaze. "Morning, Boyd," the sheriff said. "Didn't expect to see company out this far." Harlan wiped his hands. "Morning, Sheriff. Miss Nora Hale, new schoolteacher for Red Creek." Corman's eyes narrowed slightly. "That so?" Nora nodded. "Yes, sir. I was delayed by the storm." The sheriff dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. "Funny thing," he said. "I got a telegraph from Kansas City last night. They're looking for a woman traveling west. Teacher by the name of Nora Hale. Said she's wanted for questioning." Nora went still. Her hands tightened around the wagon frame. Harlan's expression didn't change, but his jaw did. "Questioning for what?" Corman shrugged. "Shooting. A man named Henry Clark. Some say he was her employer." The air went heavy. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Nora met the sheriff's eyes, her voice quiet but firm. "I didn't shoot him. He tried to—" She stopped herself, swallowing hard. "He tried to hurt me." "I ran." Corman looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe so. But you know how folks talk. If you're staying in Red Creek, you'll have to clear this up." "I will," she said. The sheriff nodded once, then tipped his hat again and rode off down the road. When he was gone, Harlan turned toward her. "Is that true?" Her chin lifted. "Every word." He studied her for a long time. "Then you'd best hope this town believes it." Nora met his stare without blinking. "I've learned not to rely on belief, Mr. Boyd, just on truth." For a moment, the only sound was the creak of leather and the soft rattle of wind through the grass. Then Harlan turned back to the wheel. "Truth doesn't always keep a person safe out here. Neither does silence," she said. And as the sun sank lower, the distance between them began to feel like something fragile, something that could break either way. By evening, word had already spread through Red Creek. News traveled faster than a horse on dry ground, and gossip traveled faster still. At the saloon, at the general store, and even outside the small church, folks whispered about the woman at Harlan Boyd's ranch, the one wanted in Kansas City. Some said she'd shot a man cold. Others said it was self-defense. None of them knew for sure, but every story grew taller as it passed. Harlan rode into town the next morning to buy supplies. He could feel the stares before he even tied his horse to the post. "Boyd," called a ranch hand near the water trough. "You got yourself a lady fugitive out there?" Harlan didn't look up. "You got yourself too much time, Clay." A few men chuckled, but the talk didn't stop. Inside the general store, Mrs. Finch, the shopkeeper's wife, leaned across the counter. "That poor girl," she whispered. "If she's innocent, I pray the Lord sees her through. But if she's not, well, trouble follows trouble." Harlan gave a curt nod, paid for the flour and nails, and left. He didn't like to talk. Never had. But what he disliked more was the way it made him remember the last time people in Red Creek whispered behind his back. When his fiancée died, they said he'd brought bad luck with him, that he was cursed. By the time he got home, Nora was sitting by the fence, brushing down his horse. She looked up at him, trying to read his face. "Did the sheriff say anything else?" she asked. "No," Harlan said, unloading the wagon. "But the town's talking." I figured. He paused. "You knew this would catch up to you." Nora nodded slowly. "I did. I just didn't think it'd follow me this far." He leaned against the wagon, watching her carefully. "You want to tell me what happened?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then she set the brush down and looked out toward the hills. "I worked as a tutor for a wealthy family in Kansas City," she said quietly. "The man, Mr. Clark, was on the board of an orphanage. He stole from it. Thousands meant for the children. When I found out, I threatened to go to the papers. That night he cornered me. I had the revolver from my father's old trunk. I only meant to scare him." Her eyes dropped. "The bullet hit his arm, not his heart. But by morning he told the law I'd tried to kill him and fled with his money. They believed him. Men like him are always believed." Harlan didn't move. The story had the kind of truth that didn't need polish. It was raw and simple, like the land itself. Finally he said, "You did what you had to." Nora looked at him, surprised. "You believe me?" He met her eyes, steady. "Don't much matter if I do. You'll have to stand for it yourself when the time comes." Something in his tone, flat, yet not unkind, struck her harder than pity ever could. "I've been standing alone a long time," she said, softly. "Then maybe you're stronger than most." She turned away so he wouldn't see the tears that suddenly burned behind her eyes. That evening, they ate in silence again, the air thick but not tense. The storm had left the land green and new-smelling. When the fire burned low, Nora spoke again, her voice small but certain. "I'm not running anymore, Mr. Boyd. If they want to find me, they can. I'm tired of hiding." Harlan didn't look up from the fire. "That might bring trouble to my door." "I'll leave if you want me to." He said nothing for a long moment. "Then you can stay till morning." She nodded, staring into the flames. "Thank you." Harlan rose, placed another log on the fire, and stood there watching it catch. The sparks flew upward like brief stars, then vanished into the dark. Outside, a lone coyote howled, and somewhere far off thunder rumbled again, distant, but not gone. The next day dawned quiet, but there was a strange stillness in the air, the kind that comes before something breaks. The sky was clear, yet the wind carried a dry edge that didn't belong to fair weather. Harlan was out early fixing the corral gate when he saw a rider far down the trail. The man wasn't the sheriff. He was younger, better dressed than most who came through Red Creek, and rode with a purpose that made Harlan's gut tighten. Nora stepped out of the cabin with a pail of water, following his gaze. When she saw the rider, her face went pale. "It's him," she whispered. Harlan's hand dropped to his side, near the holster. "Clark?" She nodded once. "Or his hired man." I recognized the horse. The rider came closer, dust rising behind him. When he stopped at the gate, he smiled. A thin, sharp smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he said. "Fine piece of land you got here." Harlan didn't answer. The man's gaze slid to Nora. "Miss Hale. Been a long ride finding you." Nora straightened her back. "You shouldn't have come," he tipped his hat mockingly. "Mr. Clark wants what's his. Says you ran off with money and papers that don't belong to you." "I didn't take anything," she said coldly. "Tell him that." "Oh, I'll tell him plenty," the man said, eyes glinting. "But first you'll be coming with me." Harlan stepped forward, his voice low and even. "She's not going anywhere." The man's hand brushed his gun belt. "You planning to stop me, rancher?" "If I have to." The air between them turned tight as a drawn rope. Even the horses seemed to feel it, nervous, shifting their weight. Finally, the man chuckled. "Suit yourself. But I'll be back, with papers, with lawmen, maybe with others who ain't so polite." He turned his horse. "Tell her she can't hide forever." As he rode off, Harlan felt Nora's hand trembling slightly against the fence post. "He won't stop," she said quietly. Not till he drags me back there. Harlan watched the dust trail vanish. Then we don't wait for him to come. What do you mean? He turned toward the barn. If he's headed to Red Creek, the sheriff deserves to hear your side before Clark twists it. Her eyes widened. You take me into town? After what folks are already saying? He met her gaze. You're not the only one tired of running from ghosts. It took them half the morning to prepare. Nora changed into a clean dress, the one meant for her first day at school, though it was already dusted from travel. Harlan saddled the horses and packed a rifle. The ride to town was silent at first. Red Creek looked smaller than usual, just a scatter of buildings pressed against the wild horizon. When they reached the main street, heads turned. The sheriff stood outside his office, and beside him, Henry Clark himself. He was a big man, soft in the middle but sharp in the eyes, wearing city clothes that didn't fit the West. A white bandage wrapped his left arm. When he saw Nora, he smiled like a cat spotting a cornered bird. Well, Clark said. The runaway schoolteacher. Nora sat tall in the saddle. The thief who calls himself a gentleman. His smile flickered. Careful what you say. The law's listening. Sheriff Corman lifted a hand. All right, both of you. Let's talk inside. They stepped into the sheriff's office. Clark laid a stack of papers on the desk. Signed affidavits, he said. Proof she stole from me and shot me when I caught her. Nora took a slow breath, her voice calm but steady. Those papers are forged. He's the one who stole from the orphanage. I tried to stop him. The sheriff rubbed his chin. That's a mighty big claim, Miss Hale. Got proof? She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small envelope creased from travel. Letters from the orphanage matron. She sent me copies before I left. They show his signature on every withdrawal. Clark's face blanched for half a second before he hid it behind a sneer. You expect him to believe that? Corman took the letters, scanning them quietly. Harlan stood by the door, arms folded, eyes sharp as flint. The sheriff finally looked up. I'll need time to check this, but it's enough to hold both stories equal for now. No arrests. Clark slammed a fist on the desk. You'll regret this. Not as much as you will, Harlan said softly. Outside, the town had gone still. Nora met Clark's glare, and for the first time she didn't look away. Harlan watched her, small, trembling slightly but unbroken, and realized she wasn't someone who needed saving. Just someone who needed a chance. The sun hung low by the time Harlan and Nora rode out of Red Creek. The town's whispers followed them like a cold shadow. Even after the sheriff's decision, folks didn't stop staring. Some tipped their hats politely. Most didn't. Harlan kept his gaze forward. He knew how talk could spread like prairie fire, fast and hungry, burning truth with rumor. Nora rode beside him, quiet but steady. Her hands gripped the reins tighter than before. When the town disappeared behind the hills, she finally spoke. You shouldn't have stood up for me. Harlan glanced her way. Wasn't about you, she frowned. Then what was it about? He looked out at the horizon, the sky turning to a wide stretch of orange and blue. Doing what's right, even when it doesn't fix much. For a while, the only sound was the creak of saddle leather and the soft clop of hooves. Then Nora said more softly, You remind me of my father. He used to say that too. What happened to him? Fever took him when I was 16. Mama followed not long after. Harlan nodded once, saying nothing. He understood loss too well to answer. When they reached the ranch, the light was fading. Nora climbed down and began to untie the saddle straps, trying to keep her hands. You don't have to help with that, Harlan said. I'd rather be useful. He half smiled. You already are. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was no noise. Just that small warmth between two tired souls who'd spent too long keeping the world at arm's length. Inside, the fire crackled again. Harlan poured coffee while Nora sat by the window watching the sky darken. You think he'll come back? She asked. Clark? She nodded. Men like him don't like being cornered, Harlan said. He'll come back. Probably with the company. Nora turned from the window. Then I'll face him. He looked at her for a long moment. You sound sure. I am. She hesitated, then added, You don't have to get involved. Harlan leaned back in his chair. Ain't up to you who I fight for, Miss Hale. She gave a faint smile. Then what do you fight for? He stared into the fire, his voice low. Used to be for land, then for her. Her eyes softened. Your fiancé, he nodded once. After she died, I stopped fighting for anything. And now? He looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Now I'm trying to remember what it feels like. For the first time, she didn't look away. Outside, the wind rose again, brushing the windows with a hollow moan. Later, after supper, Nora stepped out to the porch. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The moon was pale and thin, casting the land in silver. She stood there, letting the quiet wash over her until she heard the soft creak of the door. Harlan joined her, his hat pulled low. He didn't speak. They just stood there, side by side, watching the stars come out one by one. After a while, Nora said, You know what's strange? Even with all this, I feel safer here than I have in years. Harlan didn't answer right away. Then quietly, Sometimes a place ain't safe because it's quiet. It's safe because someone finally cares enough to keep it that way. She looked at him, the words sinking deep. When she finally went inside, Harlan stayed on the porch, staring into the night. Somewhere far off, a lone owl called through the trees. He rested a hand on the railing, his mind full of things he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Hope, fear, something almost like peace. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. Down the valley, faint and far, a glimmer of lantern light moved along the trail, the kind carried by men who didn't travel with good intentions. Harlan saw it, his expression hardening again. Looks like you were right, Miss Hale, he murmured under his breath. He's coming back. By dawn, Harlan was already awake. He'd slept lightly, one hand near his rifle, listening for the sounds beyond the wind. The faint glow he'd seen the night before hadn't been a dream. Men were out there, waiting, watching. He stepped outside quietly, boots crunching on the frosted ground. The air was sharp with morning cold. Down in the valley, no lanterns showed now, but the feeling in his gut told him trouble was close. Inside the cabin, Nora was awake too. She stood by the window, shawl wrapped tight, watching him. You saw them again, didn't you? She asked. He nodded. Trail dust near the ridge. 3, maybe 4 horses. Clark's men? Most likely. He poured coffee into a tin cup and drank it black. We'll need to be ready. Her fingers tightened around her shawl. You mean to fight them? If they come here, I don't mean to invite them in for tea. She managed a weak smile, but her voice trembled. I never wanted this to touch anyone else. You didn't bring it, Harlan said, setting the cup down. He did. The firmness in his tone steadied her more than any promise could. By mid-morning they were both outside, moving with quiet purpose. Harlan checked the rifle, then the shotgun, laying each by the door. Nora helped carry extra rounds from the shed, her movements nervous but quick. You ever fired one of these? He asked, nodding toward the rifle. She hesitated. My father taught me to shoot a pistol, never a rifle. Then you'll learn today, he said. They practiced behind the barn where the fence posts stood like silent sentries. Harlan showed her how to rest the barrel, how to breathe, how not to flinch. Her first shot went wide, splintering the top of a fence post. Better than most men's first try, he said. She laughed under her breath, the sound small but real. You say that to all your students? Never had one before. They kept at it until the sun climbed high. Sweat glistened at her temples despite the cool air, but she didn't quit. When she finally hit the tin can dead center, Harlan gave a short nod. Good, you'll do. She lowered the rifle, panting. I don't want to hurt anyone. Then don't, he said. Just don't let them hurt you. Inside they ate a quick meal, bread, jerky, coffee gone lukewarm. Neither had much appetite. Around noon the wind shifted. The horses in the corral started to snort and stomp. Harlan froze. They're close, Nora's heart pounded. She looked out the window. Dust rose from the ridge, 4 riders, just as he'd guessed. The man in front wore a dark coat and a white bandage on his arm. Henry Clark. They came faster than I thought, Harlan muttered, grabbing the rifle. Nora's breath caught. We should go. Right out the back way, he shook his head. We wouldn't make it to the next ridge before they caught us. Better to face them here. She swallowed hard but didn't argue. Harlan moved to the window, watching as the riders spread out, circling the ranch like wolves. Clark's voice carried on the wind. Boyd, he shouted. You've got something that belongs to me. Harlan opened the door and stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Don't recall stealing anything from a thief, Clark sneered from his saddle. That woman's mine. She's coming with me one way or another. She ain't yours, Harlan said calmly, and she's not leaving this ranch unless she chooses to. Clark's men shifted in their saddles, hands near their guns. From inside, Nora's voice rang out, firm despite the tremor in it. I'm not going anywhere, Henry. He turned toward the sound, fury twisting his face. You think that rancher can save you? Harlan stepped off the porch, boots sinking into the dust. Ain't about saving. It's about standing. For a heartbeat, everything went still, the wind, the horses, the world itself. Then Clark raised his hand, and the first gunshot split the air. The first shot hit the porch post, splintering wood into sharp flakes. Nora ducked behind the doorway, heart hammering. Harlan dropped to one knee beside the porch rail, returning fire with a single measured shot. One of Clark's men yelped, clutching his shoulder, and fell from the saddle. Stay low, Harlan shouted. I'm not running, Nora yelled back. She grabbed the pistol from the table inside, the same one that had saved her once before. Clark and his remaining men scattered for cover behind a fallen fence line. The sharp echo of gunfire rolled through the valley, bouncing off the ridges. Smoke drifted between them like ghostly mist. Harlan fired again, hitting the post near Clark's boot. You can still ride out, he called. Clark's voice came back, cruel and mocking. You think you can keep her safe? You couldn't even keep your last woman alive. The words hit harder than any bullet. Harlan's jaw clenched, but his hand stayed steady. Inside, Nora's blood turned cold at the sound. She looked out through the crack between the door and wall, saw Clark smirking as he reloaded. His cruelty was the same as always, using pain like a weapon. She raised her pistol and took a deep breath. You won't say her name, she shouted, stepping into the doorway. Clark turned toward her voice just as lightning flashed in the far sky. She fired once, clean and sure. The bullet struck his gun hand, spinning the revolver from his grip. He cursed and fell from his horse, clutching his arm. His remaining man fired wildly in panic. But Harlan's rifle barked once more, sending the man's hat spinning off his head. He dropped his gun and bolted toward the hills. The sound of hooves faded into silence. Smoke lingered, curling lazily in the wind. Harlan stepped forward cautiously, rifle still raised. Clark lay in the dirt, face twisted in pain and rage. Blood seeped through his bandaged arm, staining the sleeve dark. You'll hang for this, Clark hissed. You and her both. Harlan stared down at him, calm as stone. No, I don't think we will. Clark glared up at Nora, who had come to stand beside Harlan. You think they'll believe your story now? A schoolteacher with a gun hiding out with a killer? Nora's voice didn't shake. Maybe they'll believe the letters. Maybe they'll believe the sheriff when he sees what kind of man you are. Clark's sneer faltered for the first time. He tried to reach for the fallen gun, but Harlan kicked it out of reach. Ride back to town, Harlan said coldly. Tell them the truth, or next time I won't aim for your arm. Clark spat into the dirt, fury trembling through him, but he knew when a fight was lost. He dragged himself up, clutching his wound, and stumbled toward his horse. You'll regret crossing me, he growled. Harlan said nothing, only watched as Clark climbed into the saddle and rode off, limping and broken, disappearing into the distance. When the sound was gone, the silence felt heavy and strange. Nora lowered her pistol slowly. Her hands trembled now that the danger had passed. It's over, she whispered. Harlan shook his head. Not yet. He'll twist this if he can. The sheriff needs to hear what happened before Clark gets there first. Nora looked up at him, exhausted but resolute. Then we ride tonight. He met her eyes, saw the fire still burning behind them despite the fear. You sure you're up for that? I've been running long enough, she said. It's time to stop. The last light of day stretched long shadows across the land. Harlan looked out toward Red Creek, the town waiting beyond the hills. Then let's finish this, he said quietly. As they saddled the horses, the wind picked up again, cold, dry, and full of dust. The world felt wide and empty, but not hopeless. For the first time in 2 years, Harlan Boyd felt like a man with something worth standing for again. The ride to Red Creek was long and silent. The moon hung low, pale as bone, lighting their path through the valley. The only sounds were the horses' steady hooves and the creak of leather. Dust rose behind them like a thin ghost trail. Harlan rode ahead, his rifle across his saddle, eyes scanning the horizon. Nora followed closely, her coat pulled tight against the cold. Every mile felt heavy with what waited at the end, a reckoning. When they reached the edge of town, lanterns still burned in the saloon and sheriff's office. Red Creek wasn't asleep. Word of gunfire had likely reached it already. Harlan dismounted first. Stay close, he said quietly. Nora nodded, her jaw set. I'm not hiding. They walked together toward the sheriff's office. The air smelled of smoke and whiskey. A couple of late-night drinkers stood outside the saloon, whispering as they passed. Inside, Sheriff Avery looked up from his desk. He was a thick man with kind eyes, but tonight, those eyes carried weariness and suspicion. Well, Avery said slowly, setting down his coffee mug, I was just about to ride out your way. Boyd. Heard Clark came tearing through town, bleeding and screaming that you two tried to kill him. Nora stepped forward. He came to take me by force. He had men with him. Harlan defended himself and me. Avery leaned back in his chair. That so? Clark's story's a touch different. Harlan handed him a folded envelope from his coat pocket. You'll want to read this first. The sheriff frowned, unfolded the paper, and began to read. His brow furrowed deeper with each line. What is this? He asked finally. Letters, Nora said quietly. Proof he stole money meant for the orphanage fund in Kansas City. He framed me when I found out. I took copies before I fled. Avery's eyes moved between them, measuring truth against years of experience. Finally he sighed. I always said Clark had too many friends in high places. He reached for his hat. You two wait here. I'll fetch the deputy and send word to the marshal. When he was gone, the room went still. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound. Nora sat on the wooden bench, shoulders sagging, eyes distant. You did well, Harlan said quietly. I'm not sure it feels that way yet. She managed a faint smile. I've spent so long running I almost forgot what it's like to stop. Harlan leaned against the desk, looking at her in the dim lamplight. You stood your ground today. That takes more than courage, it takes faith. Her eyes softened. Faith isn't something I've had much of lately. He looked down at his hands. Me neither. The door creaked open again. Sheriff Avery returned, dusted off his hat, and set it down. Marshal's been sent for. Clark won't get far before they find him. You're both in the clear. Nora exhaled, the breath shaking out of her like she'd been holding it for months. Thank you, Sheriff, he nodded. You'll need a place to stay till morning. I reckon Boyd's ranch is safest till things settle. She looked toward Harlan, and for once he didn't look away. Avery gave them a long, knowing glance before heading for the door. You two get some rest. Looks like you've both had a long ride through hell and back. When the sheriff was gone, the silence felt softer somehow, less heavy. Harlan picked up his hat and held the door open. Ready to go home? He asked. Nora hesitated at the word home. Then she smiled, small but sure. Yeah, I think I am. Outside, dawn was just touching the horizon, painting the sky with a pale band of rose and gold. The wind had gentled, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. They rode out of Red Creek side by side. For the first time, neither was running from anything. Harlan glanced toward her as the sun rose higher. "You think you'll take that teaching job?" She smiled faintly. "If the town will still have me. They'd be fools not to." Nora looked at him, warmth touching her voice. "And what about you, Harlan Boyd? You think you'll ever stop guarding that heart of yours?" He smiled, the lines around his eyes softening. "I reckon it's already too late for that." The horses trotted on, their shadows stretching long across the waking prairie. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had fully climbed over the hills. The land was quiet, washed in gold light. Smoke still rose faintly from the blackened wood where bullets had splintered the porch rail. The yard looked scarred but alive, like something that had survived the storm. Nora dismounted first, boots crunching on the dry ground. She looked around, taking it all in, the house that had stood through fire and gunfire both. "Doesn't look too bad," she said softly. Harlan smiled a little. "It's seen worse. So have I." They led the horses to the barn, moving slowly, no rush in their steps now. The tension that had followed them for so long finally began to fade, replaced by a quiet kind of peace. Inside, the house smelled of ash and coffee grounds. The rifle still leaned by the door. Harlan set it down, took a deep breath, and looked toward Nora. "You don't have to stay if you'd rather head into town," he said. "Sheriff will make sure you're safe." Nora turned to him, her eyes calm but firm. "I didn't come back here because I had nowhere else to go." He looked at her, saying nothing. "I came back because running doesn't fix what's broken," she said. "Facing it does. You taught me that without meaning to." Harlan gave a quiet laugh, rough but genuine. "Maybe you taught me something too." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He met her eyes. "That a man can lose everything he thought mattered, and still have more to give." For a long moment they stood there in the stillness, the light from the window stretching between them like a bridge. Outside, the wind shifted. A hawk circled high above the pasture, riding the morning currents. Nora stepped toward the table and picked up the wildflower bouquet she had made the night before. The petals were bent now, but still bright. "I'll get these in some water," she said softly. But Harlan shook his head. "No, let's take him to the ridge," she blinked. "The ridge?" He nodded. "There's something I've been putting off too long." They walked together up the small rise behind the ranch where the grass grew thick and the air was cool. There, under a lone cedar tree, stood a simple wooden cross, his fiancée's resting place. Harlan stopped a few feet away, the old ache flickering behind his eyes. Nora stood quietly beside him, the flowers in her hands trembling slightly in the breeze. He crouched down and brushed the dust from the cross. "It's been 2 years," he murmured. "I thought if I stopped feeling, I'd stop hurting." He smiled faintly. "Guess I was wrong." Nora knelt and laid the flowers at the base of the cross. She must have been someone special. "She was," Harlan said softly. "But she'd have liked you." The words hung in the air for a moment, gentle, final, and freeing. A soft gust stirred the grass around them, carrying the scent of cedar and wild sage. Harlan stood, took off his hat, and let the wind pass through his hair. The pain didn't vanish, but it didn't weigh him down anymore either. When they turned back toward the ranch, the world seemed larger somehow, open, full of light. At the porch, Nora paused, looking out over the valley. "You think this land ever gets tired of storms?" she asked. Harlan followed her gaze. "No," he said quietly. "It just learns to grow again when they're over." She smiled. "Maybe people do too," he nodded. "Yeah, maybe they do." They stood together in the doorway, the sunlight spilling across the floorboards, painting everything warm and new. Then, without a word, Nora stepped inside and Harlan followed. The wind moved across the plains, whispering through the grass like an old song. And somewhere between the sound of the wind and the steady beat of two hearts finally at peace, The story of Harlan Boyd and Nora Hale began, not in loss, but in the promise of what comes after. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales of courage, love, and redemption from the Wild West. Every story here rides with a new beginning, just like Harlan and Nora's.